At her screen at forward operating base, Kestrel flickered with nothing but stack and sand. Major Heron Voss leaned back in his weathered chair, coffee growing cold in the pre-dawn darkness of the command center. 3 months into Operation Desert Mirage, the unforgiving expanse of the Kalari Desert had swallowed more aircraft than any fire ever could. Shifting sands created navigation nightmares, dust storms appeared without warning, and the heat could cook electronics faster than an IED could destroy them. "We've got another bird overdue," Sergeant Martinez called from the communicating console, his voice cutting through the ambient hum of cooling fans and distant generators. Flight Lieutenant Kira Ghost Thorne had been scheduled to return from her reconnaissance around 47 minutes ago. A-10 C Thunderbolt II, tel number A10965, had vanished somewhere over Grid Echo 7, a particularly treacherous stretch where 3 previous pilots had already been forced to punch out. Voss rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of command settling deeper into his shoulders. "Any emergency beacon?" "Negative, sir. Last communication was at 3:47 hours. She reported visual on the target compound then." Martinez shrugged helplessly. "Nothing." Stood and walked to the situation board, studying the red pins marking lost aircraft positions. Each pin represented millions in taxpayer dollars, and more importantly, a pilot who trusted the brass to bring them home. Ghost Coulson had become something of a running joke in the squadron, not because she was particularly stealthy, but because she had an uncanny ability to disappear from radar screens, only to materialize exactly where she needed to be. Attributed to electronic warfare systems, others to pure luck, Voss suspected it was something else entirely. The first hints of amber light crept across the horizon, painting the endless dunes in shades of copper and gold. The desert was beautiful in its desolation, but beauty meant nothing to supersonic aircraft running low on fuel with nowhere safe to land. Weather reported clear skies for the next 6 hours, but in that part of the world, meteorology was more art than science. Martinez's voice carried a note of confusion. "I'm picking up something on the emergency frequency. It's strange." Moved quickly to the console. Through the crackling static came the unmistakable whine of a turbofan engine, but there was something else, sound that shouldn't exist in the middle of nowhere. Children laughing. The faint melody of what might have been a lullaby, carried on desert wind through an open cockpit. "It's impossible," Val whispered, reaching for his headset. But even as he spoke, a shadow passed overhead, too fast and too low to be anything but an A-10 in serious trouble. The sky stretched endlessly above the command center, empty except for that impalpable shadow that had already vanished beyond the eastern peaks. Mayor Voss stood frozen at the radio console, the strange transmit still echoing in his headset. Children's laughter had no business coming through military emergency frequencies, especially not from the middle of a desert where the nearest settlement was 300 miles away. "Inez, run a diagnostic on the communications array," Voss ordered, though he knew the equipment was functioning perfectly. He'd heard that sound before, years ago during a deployment in Afghanistan, when Ghost had pulled a wounded reconnaissance team out of an impossible situation. The same ethereal quality to her transmissions, as if her aircraft existed partially in another realm. Martinez's fingers flew across the keyboard. "All systems nominal, sir, but I'm still picking up engine noise from Grid Echo 7. He paused, adjusting his headset. "It's getting stronger." The reinforced windows of the command center, other personnel had begun to notice the disturbance. Maintenance crews pointed skyward, shielding their eyes against the declining sun. The base's early warning systems remained silent. Whatever was out there wasn't registering on conventional radar. Lieutenant Kira Thorne had earned her Coulson Ghost during her third deployment, when she'd somehow navigated her damaged A-10 through a sandstorm that had grounded every other aircraft in the theater. The weather report had called for zero visibility, winds gusting to 6 knots, and sand particles thick enough to strip paint from aluminum. Standard protocol demanded all aircraft remain on the ground. Ghost had taken off anyway, out of recklessness or insubordination, but because 8 Marines were pinned down in a compound 40 miles southeast, with enemy armor clothing their position. The rescue helicopters couldn't fly in the storm. Close air support was impossible. Every tactical manual said the situation was hopeless. This aircraft had emerged from the brown wall of the sandstorm like something conjured from mythology, her 13 cans being in precise, measured bursts. The Marines lived. The enemy armor became scattered debris across the desert floor. When asked later how he navigated through zero visibility, Ghost had simply shrugged and said the desert had shown her the way. As Mayor Voss watched his radar operator struggle to track something that seemed to phase in and out of reality, he wondered if Ghost's connection to the harsh landscape went deeper than anyone understood. The Kalari Desert was older than human memory, older than the conflicts that brought Western militaries to its endless expanse. Some places held their own consciousness, their own will. "Contact bearing 090, range 12 miles and closing," Martinez reported, "but it's not showing consistent altitude. The return keeps fluctuating." Voss lifted his binoculars, scanning the eastern approach. Heat mirages already shimmered despite the early hour, creating illusions that could fool even experienced eyes. But there, a speck against the dawn sky, too purposeful to be debris, too steady to be a mirage. Radio crackled again with that impossible sound of distant laughter, now joined by a woman's voice, calm and professional despite whatever hell he'd flown through. The voice that emerged from the stack belonged unmistakably to Ghost, but carried undertones that raised goosebumps along Voss's arms. "Kestrel Control, this is Ghost One approaching from the east. I've had some passengers aboard who have been waiting a very long time to come home." The word hung in the air like corded smoke. A-10 Thunderbolts were single-seat aircraft. There was no room for passengers, no provisions for carrying anything but ordnance and the pilot's determination to bring steel rain to those who threatened American forces. "Ghost One, confirm your passenger status," Voss transmitted, though part of him dreaded the answer. Response came wrapped in that same ethereal quality, as if transmitted across dimensions rather than radio waves. "Kestrel Control, I've located the missing aircrew from Grid's Echo 4 through Echo 7. All souls accounted for." He's pulled up the deployment records on his screen, cross-referencing the grid coordinates Ghost had referenced. His face went pale as the data piloted. "Sir, those are the crash sites from the past 3 months. 7 aircraft lost, 7 pilots." "From KIA," Voss finished, the words hitting like desert dust in his mouth. The speck had resolved into the distinctive silhouette of an A-10C, but something was wrong with its flight characteristics. The aircraft seemed to shimmer, its edges undefined against the morning sky. Maintenance crews had stopped their work to stare upward, tools forgotten in their hand. Ghost's transmission continued, her voice carrying across the desert wind with supernatural clarity, requesting emergency landing clearance. "My passengers have stories to tell, and I promised them they wouldn't be forgotten." Cadence hit Voss like a physical blow. 7 pilots, 7 aircraft lost to the unforgiving desert over 3 months of operation. 7 families back home who'd received fold flags and the thanks of a grateful nation. 7 empty bunks in squadrons that had learned to whisper their names only in the quiet hours before dawn. First one, what is your current fuel status? Voss asked, though protocol seemed inadequate for whatever was approaching his base. Fuel is not a concern, Kestrel Control. We're running on something else entirely now. A-10 dropped lower, its approach angle steeper than any normal landing pattern. As it passed directly overhead, several ground crew members swore they could see multiple figures in the single-seat cockpit, though the morning light played tricks with shadows and reflection. Sergeant Aline Rodriguez had been turning wrenches on military aircraft for 15 years, but she'd never seen anything like the A-10 that was descending toward runway 17. The Thunderbolt's titanium bathtub cockpit, designed to protect pilots from ground fire, seemed to glow with an internal light that had nothing to do with instrument panels or avionics. Is this Mary and Joseph? Rodriguez whispered, making the sign of the cross as the aircraft's landing gear extended. The hydraulic whine should have been routine familiar, but it carried harmonics that resonated in her chest like cathedral bells. The control tower, Mayor Voss gripped his radio handset so tightly his knuckles had gone white. All stations, this is Kestrel Control. Runway 17 is now closed to all traffic. Emergency vehicles stand by. Fire trucks and ambulances rolled toward their position with practiced efficiency, but their crews kept glancing skyward with expressions of unease. Something fundamental about the approaching aircraft violated their understanding of how metal and physics should interact with the material world. His voice came through the radio one more time, and now Voss could hear other voices in the background, faint, but distinctly there. Male voices, speaking call signs that appeared on his KIA roster. Kestrel Control, be advised we're carrying some sensitive cargo. These boys have been sleeping in the sand too long, and their families deserve to know they completed their mission. A-10 touched down with impossible gentleness for an aircraft designed to survive combat damage that would destroy letter machines. Its engine spooled down with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire desert. And as the canopy opened, a figure emerged that was recognizably Flight Lieutenant Kira Thorne, but somehow more substantial than before, as if she'd absorbed something essential from the landscape itself. She climbed down from her aircraft with fluid precision, her flight suit unmarked by the sand that should have scoured every surface during her extended mission. Her dark hair was pulled back in the regulation bun, but silver streaks that hadn't been there 3 months ago caught the morning light. Her eyes held depths that seemed to reflect not just the sky, but something far older and more patient. Major, she said, snagging a crisp salute as Voss approached across the tarmac. Mission accomplished, sir. All personnel accounted for and ready for repatriation. Voss returned the salute automatically, but his eyes kept drifting to the aircraft behind her. The A-10's cockpit was empty now, but he could swear he'd seen movement in the peripheral vision, shadows that resolved into nothing when he looked directly. Your aircraft has been missing for over 18 hours. We had you listed as presumed down. Moves differently out there, sir, Ghost replied, gesturing toward the eastern desert with one gloved hand. The sand remembers everything, every pilot who's ever fallen, every mission that's ever been flown. Sometimes it takes a while to gather everyone up. Old ground crew maintained a respectful distance, but Voss could see them whispering among themselves, pointing at details on Ghost A-10 that didn't match their maintenance records. Court marks that formed patterns resembling air calligraphy, or patterns on the landing gear that suggested the aircraft had been operating in environments no earthly desert could provide. Most disturbing of all, the mission computer showed flight time that exceeded the aircraft's fuel capacity by several hours. And I need you to debrief immediately, Voss said, though he wasn't sure any debrief could adequately explain what he was witnessing. It's not, but her attention seemed divided between the conversation and something only she could perceive. Of course, sir, but first, I need to make some notification. 7 families have been waiting for word about their son. They deserve to know that Captain Morrison found the intelligence he was looking for, that Lieutenant Hayes successfully destroyed the enemy supply depot, that Staff Sergeant Williams held his position until the convoy got through. Cite each name with the reverent reserve for prayers or poetry, and with each name, the desert wind seemed to carry whispers of acknowledgement. Voss found himself believing, despite every rational instinct, that somewhere in the vast emptiness beyond the base perimeter, 7 aircraft had indeed completed their final missions under Ghost's impossible guidance. Briefing room at Fubkestrel had been designed for routine mission reports, not for conversations that challenged the fundamental nature of reality. Mayor Voss sat across from Ghost at a metal table that had seen countless hours of tactical planning, but the fluorescent lights seemed dimmer now, as if the one across from him existed partially in shadow. From the beginning, Lieutenant, Voss said, activating the digital recorder. Your last confirmed transmission was at 3:47 hours yesterday. His eyes focused on something beyond the concrete walls. I was investigating the compound in Grid Echo 7, same as the mission brief specified, but when I arrived, the turret wasn't there anymore. Instead, I found Captain Morrison's F-16. Quarter's LED blinked steadily, but Voss noticed his coffee had gone cold despite being poured minutes before. Morrison was lost 6 weeks ago. His aircraft was never recovered. It was lost, sir. It was waiting. Ghost's voice carried that same ethereal quality he'd heard over the radio. The captain had found what he was looking for, the intelligence about enemy supply routes through the southern masses, but he couldn't transmit it because the desert had other plans. Voss leaned forward, studying Ghost's face for signs of delirium or psychological trauma. Her pupils were normal, her speech patterns coherent, but something fundamental had changed. She spoke with the authority of someone who'd witnessed events beyond conventional military experience. What kind of lens? Collects things, sir. Lost aircraft, incomplete missions, pilots who die before they can report their finding. It's been doing this for thousands of years, long before we brought our jets and our wars to its sand. Ghost paused, tilting her head as if listening to voices Voss couldn't hear. But sometimes it needs someone to help organize the collection, someone who understands both the old ways and the new ones. The sun climbed higher, but the temperature in the debriefing room seemed to drop several degrees. Voss's breath missed slightly as he spoke. And you're suggesting you served in that capacity? Didn't choose it, sir. It chose me. Ghost's hand moved to touch something at her throat, a pendant that hadn't been part of her gear during the previous day's mission briefing. The metal looked ancient, carved with symbols that seemed to shift when viewed peripherally. Captain Morgan briefed me on his finding. Lieutenant Hayes showed me the successful strike on the enemy depot. One by one, they all reported their completion. A rational part of Voss's mind cataloged the improbabilities. Aircraft operating without fuel, pilots communicating weeks after confirmed death, navigation through conditions that should have been fatal. But another part, the part that had survived 3 combat deployments by trusting instincts over instruments, recognized truth when he heard it. What about the others, the remaining 5 pilots? Smiled, and for a moment her face seemed to superimpose with other figures, older, weathered by desert wind and ancient purposes. They're all accounted for, sir. Staff Sergeant Williams, Lieutenant Chen, Mayor Parker, Captain Rodriguez, and Lieutenant Jackson. Each completed their assigned tasks. The desert kept them safe until I could gather their reports. Corder continued its steady blinking, but Voss wondered if anything being said would make sense when played back later. Floors below the debriefing room, in the secure communications center, Sergeant Martinez was discovering that Ghost's return had implications beyond a single missing pilot. His computer screen displayed 7 separate message drafts, each addressed to a different family, each containing information that officially didn't exist. Morin's wife would learn that her husband had successfully identified the mountain passes being used to smuggle weapons to insurgent forces. The intelligence, transmitted through channels that bypassed conventional radio entirely, had already led to interdiction operations that saved countless American lives. Hayes' parents would receive confirmation that their son had not only located, but destroyed a significant enemy ammunition depot, eliminating resources that would have fueled attacks for months. The explosion had been visible from satellite imagery, though no aircraft had been tracked to the area. Sergeant Williams' teenage daughter would discover that her father had held a critical observation post during a convoy ambush, his targeting data enabling precise counter-battery fire that allowed 37 vehicles to reach safety. The convoy commander's report, filed the morning after Williams was declared KA, confirmed the mysterious appearance of accurate fire support data that had saved the entire operation. Each family would learn that their loved one's final mission had succeeded beyond the parameters originally assigned. But they would also learn something else, that the desert itself had become a participant in their war, keeping faithful watch over those who served until their duties could be properly completed. He stared at his screen, cursor blinking in the subject line of the first message. How did you tell someone that their son, husband, or father had died as reported, but had somehow continued serving even after death? How did you explain that the same landscape that had claimed their lives had also ensured their sacrifice retained meaning? Sergeant. The voice belonged to the base chaplain, Father Mackenzie, who'd appeared in the communicating center without Martinez noticing his approach. The priest's face carried the expression of someone who'd spent the morning feeling unusual reports from personnel across the base. Father, I've got 7 notification messages to send, but I'm not sure how to word them. As he moved to look over Martinez's shoulder at the screen, as he read the draft messages, his expression shifted from confusion to something approaching awe. Sergeant, in 30 years of military service, I've learned that some truths transcend normal understanding. These families deserve to know their loved ones completed their mission. But how do I explain? Don't explain the inexplicable, the chaplain interrupted gently. You simply report the facts as they've been given to you. The desert kept faith with these pilots, even when conventional military system couldn't. That's not our mystery to solve. His nod, understanding settling over him like the desert wind that carried sounds and scents from impossible distances. His fingers found the keys, and he began typing the first notification. Words came easier than he expected, as if something beyond his own knowledge was guiding their formation. Word of Ghost's improbable return had spread through Fubcaster like wildfire through Draggrass. The official reports remained classified, but military bases thrived on unofficial channels of communication that moved faster than any radio network. Maintenance crews whispered about aircraft that showed no signs of wear despite extended desert operation. Pilots gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones about navigating techniques that transcended conventional. Lieutenant Marcus Hawk Thompson had been Ghost's wingman during their previous deployment. He found her in the pilot's ready room, studying weather reports with an intensity that suggested she was reading information invisible to others. Ghost, he said, settling into the adjacent chair. Good to have you back, but the whole base is talking. They're saying your bird was carrying passengers. Ghost looked up from the meteorological data, her eyes reflecting depths that reminded Hawk of desert oases, places where still water held secrets accumulated over centuries. They weren't passengers exactly, more like consultants. It has been flying combat missions longer than the Air Force has existed, Hawk. Sometimes they take notes. Ghost finger traced patterns on the weather map that corresponded to no existing flight paths. Captain Morrison's F-16 had been circling grid Echo for 6 weeks, maintaining perfect position over the intelligence target. His instruments never failed. His fuel never ran out. He was waiting for someone who could carry his information back to the living world. Studied his friend's face, searching for signs of the pilot he'd flown alongside for 18 months. The features were the same, but something fundamental had shifted in the space behind her eyes. Ghost had always been unconventional, willing to trust instincts over procedure, but now she spoke with the authority of someone who'd accessed classified information from sources that predated military intelligence. They're telling me dead pilots have been flying active missions. I knew that some landscapes don't recognize the distinction between living and dead. They only recognize duty completed and duty remaining. Ghost folded the weather report with precise movements. The Kalahari Desert has been a battleground for 5,000 years. Roman legions, Mongol horsemen, British colonials, Soviet paratroopers, all of them learned that the sand remembers everything. Glanced around the ready room, nodding that other pilots had begun to gather within earshot. Ghost's words carried beyond normal conversation, creating ripples of attention throughout the space. What happened now? Do we just pretend 7 KIA pilots filed successful mission reports? Stood, her movement fluid and purposeful. We don't pretend anything, Hawk. We honor the fact that they completed their assignments despite circumstances that should have made success impossible. The enemy supply depot is gone. The intelligence on Mountain Hat usage has been delivered. Convoy routes are secure. Paused at the ready room door, looking back at the assembled pilots with an expression that somehow encompassed both human warmth and something far older. It chose me to serve as liaison between worlds that usually don't communicate. That's not a duty I requested, but it's one I accept. Her hand touched the ancient pendant at her throat. Some battles are fought in dimensions that don't appear on tactical maps. Some victories require understanding that transcends standard operational procedures. Door closed behind her with unusual finality, leaving the pilots to contemplate implications that stretched beyond their training. His aircraft sat alone on the far side of the flight line, isolated from routine maintenance operations by orders that carried Mayor Voss' signature, but seemed to originate from sources with higher security clearances. The A-10 looked normal from a distance, but personnel who ventured too close reported atmospheric disturbances that made their instruments fluctuate and their radios pick up transmission in languages that predated modern military communication. Sergeant Chinwei, the base's senior avionics technician, had been ordered to conduct a complete system analysis of Ghost's aircraft. His diagnostic equipment registered readings that shouldn't have been hollow, fuel levels that exceed tank capacity, flight hours that surpassed engine specifications, navigation data that include coordinates for locations that didn't exist on any earthly map. It's impossible, Chin muttered, downloading data from the mission computer. The aircraft's black box showed a continuous flight path that looped through dimensions where traditional physics became magician rather than laws. Altitude readings fluctuated between sea level and heights where no atmosphere should exist. Speed indicators show velocity that would have torn apart any conventional aircraft. Disturbing were the communication logs. The system had recorded 7 distinct voice patterns beyond Ghost transmission, each matching the vocal signatures of pilots officially declared killed in action over the past 3 months. The conversation covered tactical assessment, target confirmation, and mission accomplishments that corresponded exactly with intelligent requirements that had remained unfulfilled since their disappearance. Pulled up Captain Morin's file on his tablet, cross-referencing the voice patterns with archive recordings from the pilot's previous mission. The match was perfect, down to Morin's distinct Louisiana accent and his hat of Huntington's standards during long reconnaissance flights. But according to all official records, Morrison had died 6 weeks ago when his F-16 disappeared during a sandstorm. Chen, Ghost's voice came from directly behind him, though he hadn't heard her approach across the flight line. Spun around, nearly dropping his diagnostic equipment. Ghost stood 3 feet away, her flight suit immaculate despite the desert heat that left everyone else sweat-stained by mid-afternoon. Lieutenant, I was just running standard post-flight diagnostics. And what are the results telling you? Glanced at his tablet, then back at Ghost's expectant face. Her expression held neither challenge nor concern, only patient curiosity about his findings. Ma'am, with respect, these readings don't make sense according to any technical manual I've ever studied. It's not as if his confusion were expected. The desert operates under different maintenance schedules, Sergeant. It keeps aircraft operational using methods that don't appear in standard repair procedures. She gestured toward her A-10, which seemed to shimmer slightly in the afternoon heat. But the important question isn't how it works, it's whether the missions were successful. The pilots completed 7 separate assignments, Chen said slowly. All critical intelligence gathered, all turrets eliminated, all objectives achieved. The aircraft performed exactly as designed. Ghost's hand briefly touched Chen's shoulder, and for a moment he felt a connection to something vast and patient that had been maintaining military equipment since the first warrior picked up a bronze sword. Some technologies transcend the specifications in the technical manuals. She walked away across the shimmering tarmac. Chen looked down at his diagnostic tablet one more time. The impossible readings remained unchanged, but now they seemed less like equipment malfunctions and more like evidence of operational procedures that existed beyond conventional understanding. Of them both, the desert sky stretched endlessly, holding secrets that would never appear in any after-action report. Voss stood in the secure communication room, holding 7 manila folders that contained the most unusual casualty reports in his military career. Each file documented a pilot officially killed in action who had subsequently completed their assigned mission with tactical precision that exceeded original operational parameters. Secure video link to Pentagon brass had been active for 20 minutes, but the conversation had moved beyond normal military reporting procedures in territory that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of warfare itself. Are you seriously telling me that 7 KIA pilots have filed successful mission reports? General Patricia Hawthorne's voice carried across the encrypted connection with the weight of someone who'd spent 30 years navigating military bureaucracy. Her face on the video screen showed the expression of an officer trying to balance operational reality with regulatory requirements. I'm reporting that 7 previously incomplete missions have been accomplished, and the intelligence gathered corresponds exactly with pre-mortem assignment parameters. Voss chose his words carefully, staying within the bounds of verifiable fact while avoiding speculation about mechanisms that defied conventional explanation. Flight Lieutenant Thorne served as the conduit for the intelligence. Thorne returned from her extended reconnaissance mission with comprehensive debrief from all 7 pilots. The information has been verified through multiple independent sources and has already led to successful interdiction operation. Hawthorne leaned back in her chair, studying something off camera. Major, I've been reviewing satellite imagery of the Kalahari Desert sector for the past 3 months. Our orbital assets have detected electromagnetic anomalies that correspond with each aircraft loss, areas where radar returned behaving consistently, where atmospheric readings fluctuate beyond normal parameters. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the communication room's air conditioning. Ma'am, what I'm about to tell you remains classified at the highest levels. The Department of Defense has been aware of unusual phenomena in certain geographic regions where extended military operations have occurred, areas where the landscape itself appears to develop, characteristics that interact with our technology in ways that transcend normal environmental factors. General's image pixelated briefly, as if the secure transmission were encountering interference from sources that existed outside conventional electromagnetic spectrum. When the connection stabilized, her expression had shifted to something approaching reverence. Kalahari Desert has been a theater of operations for military forces throughout recorded history. Our own legions reported encounters with phantom cavalry that provided tactical intelligence. British colonial forces documented aircraft sighting decades before powered flight was invented. Soviet advisors filed reports about navigation assistance from sources they couldn't identify. I opened the first casualty folder, studying Captain Morin's photograph, a young pilot from Shreveport whose last mission had been considered a failure until Ghost's return. Are you suggesting that certain landscapes develop consciousness? Suggesting that some battlefields accumulate enough military activity to develop their own operational procedures? The desert doesn't distinguish between living and dead personnel. It only recognizes mission requirements and available resources. The communication room seemed to grow quieter, as if the base itself were listening to revelations that redefined the relationship between military personnel and the environments where they served. Your orders, ma'am? Hawthorne's response came after a pause that stretched long enough for Voss to hear the distant sound of aircraft engines from the flight line, though no operations were scheduled for the afternoon. You normal operations, Mayor, but understand that Flight Lieutenant Thorne has become something more than a conventional pilot. She's now serving as a liaison between military command structure and forces that operate under alternative command authorities. Briefing brought together every pilot assigned to focus control, but the atmosphere differed significantly from routine tactical updates. Ghost sat at the front of the room beside Mayor Voss, but her presence seemed to extend beyond the physical space she occupied. Other pilots found their attention drawn to her not because of what she said, but because of what she represented, proof that the rules governing military operations were far more complex than their training had suggested. Our desert sector presents unique operational challenges, Voss began, his words carrying official weight while carefully avoiding details that would require security classifications beyond the room's clearance level. Flight Lieutenant Thorne has gathered intelligence that significantly expands our understanding of the tactical environment. Jennifer Viper Reynolds raised her hand. As the squadron's senior pilot, she'd earned the right to ask questions that others might hesitate to voice. Sir, are we talking about conventional intelligence gathering, or something that falls outside standard reconnaissance procedures? Stood, her movement fluid and purposeful. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate with the building structure itself. Captain Reynolds, the desert has been conducting surveillance operations for thousands of years. It maintains comprehensive databases on any movements, supply routes, and tactical vulnerabilities. But accessing that information requires understanding communication protocols that weren't covered in flight school. And Tommy Dash Martinez, the youngest pilot in the squadron, leaned forward in his chair. Ma'am, are you saying the landscape itself provides tactical support? Saying that some environments develop their own military intelligence capabilities. Ghost's eyes seemed to focus on distant horizons visible through the briefing room's small windows. The sand remembers every aircraft that's ever crossed it, every pilot who's ever died defending its skis. That's not mysticism, that's operational history accumulated over millennia. Upper exchanged glances with the other senior pilots. And the 7 pilots who were declared KIA, what's their current status? His expression softened, showing something that transcended standard military bearing. They're serving under alternative command structures now. Their missions are complete, but their service continues in capacities that don't appear on conventional organizational charts. She paused, tilting her head as if receiving communication through channels the others couldn't access. Morrison wants Viper to know that the intelligence he gathered on any supply routes includes timing data that will be critical for next week's interdiction operation. Briefing room fell silent except for the low hum of ventilation system, and the distant sound of aircraft engines seemed to come from directions where no aircraft should be operating. Felt a chill that raised goosebumps along her arms. Morrison had been her wingman during their previous deployment, and he'd always been obsessive about timing data, analyzing any patterns with mathematical precision that bordered on the supernatural. Could you possibly know what Morrison would want me to hear? His response came with the authority of someone who transcended normal communication limitations. Because he's sitting right behind you, Kat. He's been attending every briefing since his aircraft joined the desert's operational fleet. Pilot in the room turned to look at the empty chair behind Viper, and for just a moment, several swore they could see the faint outline of a familiar figure in a fleet suit, nodding with Morrison's characteristic gesture of professional approval. Began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the endless expanse of the Kalari Desert in shades of copper and gold, transformed the landscape into something resembling a vast celestial map. Ghost stood alone on the observation deck of the control tower, watching aircraft prepare for evening patrol missions while maintaining communication with forces that operated beyond conventional radio frequencies. Voss found her there as the base settled into its evening routine. The sounds of routine military activity, maintenance crews securing equipment, kit staff preparing dinner, communications personnel monitoring radio traffic, provided a backdrop of normalcy that contrasted sharply with the extraordinary nature of their ongoing situation. And I've received confirmation from higher headquarters. Your alternative liaison duties are now officially recognized, though they remain classified at levels that most personnel won't ever access. It's not without turning from her observation of the desert. The recognition is appreciated, sir, but it doesn't change what needs to be done. 7 families now know their loved ones completed their mission successfully. 7 critical intelligence requirements have been satisfied. 7 aircraft continue to serve in capacities that ensure future operations will benefit from their experience. What about you? How do you process the responsibilities that have been placed on you? The first time since her return, Ghost's expression showed something approaching vulnerability. It's not a burden I would have chosen, Mayor, but some duties choose us rather than waiting for our expense. Her hand moved to touch the ancient pendant at her throat, which seemed to pulse with its own internal light as the sun set. It needs someone who understands both worlds, the living military that operates according to regulations and procedure, and the accumulated forces that have been serving here for centuries. Studied her profile, noting details that hadn't been present before her extended mission. The silver streaks in her dark hair caught the fading light like threads of starshine. Her eyes held depths that seemed to reflect not just the sky, but something far older and more patient. Do you regret the change? Was considered the question while watching a V-formation of aircraft that registered on no radar screen, flown by pilots whose names appeared on casualty lists rather than flight rosters. Regret implies choice, sir. What's happened to me is less like volunteering for an assignment, and more like being called to serve in a capacity I never knew existed. Below them, the base's landing light began to illuminate as day shift personnel transferred responsibilities to their night shift counterparts. But Ghost's attention focused on lights that existed in sector, visible only to those who learned to navigate between dimensions of service. Pilots under alternative command structures, they're teaching me things that weren't covered in any flight manual, navigating techniques that use stellar positions from historical periods, communication protocols that bypass electromagnetic limitation, combat tactics that incorporate geological features as active participants rather than passive terrain. Full darkness settled over the Kalari Desert. Stars emerged with brilliant clarity that city dwellers never experienced. But Ghost's eyes tracked celestial objects that occupied positions inconsistent with conventional astronomy, navigation markers for aircraft that operated under.